So the topic I'm covering today is relevance and competitiveness. And when we consider those two words, I think of them actually often as one thought. You cannot remain competitive unless you're relevant. And the purpose behind relevance can sometimes be competitiveness. So I've got a couple of thoughts. I have to confess I can spend many hours and I can wax lyrical. So I'm going to try and keep it to the point. So I'm not going to cover off the why do we need to be relevant and competitive as a country, because I think you all know that. I think everybody in this room today knows that over recent years, South Africa has slipped backwards. When I talk about the progress we've made even in small enterprises and the growth of small enterprises and the job creation that they create, we've gone backwards. And there are many, many reasons for it. So my parents brought me up well, and they told me in public company, one never talks about sex, politics, or religion. So I'm not going to talk about those. But there are many topics in that relate to relevance and competitiveness. So the first place I wanted to focus on is leadership. And I started off by thinking about who is leading in the private sector. And the part of that discussion took me to a discussion with the head of department from Stellenbosch University. He's a professor of, and I have to think about it because his professorship is unusual to me. His professorship is to do with environmental genetics, which kind of sounds like a huge topic for me. But we spoke about CEOs and who comprises CEOs in the world, and what is it that they've got that enables them to lead. And I was quite interested. For me, if I think about CEOs, I think actually they must all be entrepreneurs. And actually, that's not necessarily true. The thing I discovered in thinking about CEOs, the only thing I could see in common is that they are all very well educated. Very well educated. Now, the other bias I had in thinking about CEOs and how they have earn the right to lead, I actually have a bias, so I confess to that. I thought they would all be CAs. Isn't that what we've always been taught? But if you look at the Fortune 500 companies, the only common area of study is the area of engineering. And I'm sorry, but I was surprised at that statistic. But the other part that is common is most of them have studied well beyond B degrees. Okay, and I think that is the significant thing. They are studying. They studied in finance. In South Africa, it still is finance. Finance rules, it's 38% for finance. But what you see in the Fortune 500 companies and South African CEOs is that they've continued to study, and they've continued to study outside of their main discipline. So if they came up through the finance leg, they typically, after that, branch out to another leg. If they came up through the engineering leg, they typically branch up to another area. So I think that's the first point I wanted to make. In order to lead and lead your company to be competitive and relevant in this modern age, you've got to carry on studying. Now, each of us is not going to be a CEO. I have to tell you, there's absolutely no way I ever aspired to be a CEO. And I have to say, if you are aspiring to be a CEO, you need to come for counseling with me first. Okay. All right. This country needs CEOs, and it needs good leaders at the top. But it is important to think about this thing about CEOs and why they continue to study. And that is, of course, about this thing that the world is changing. I looked again at the likes of Warren Buffett, of Bill Gates, even Barack Obama. While he was in the White House, he spent an hour in study every single day. I think that's quite something. If you just think the man who's leading the first world, I'm not going to talk about Trump, it's in the category of sex, religion and politics, okay? You see, I shouldn't go there. All right.
We understand.
Do we all understand? Okay. So the first thing for me, that in order to be competitive, in order to be relevant, one actually has to keep on improving the ability to think, to analyze. Alvin Toffler, I have a quote for you. Does everybody know who Alvin Toffler is? I have to look this up, by the way. Future Shock. Does anybody know when he wrote Future Shock?
In the future, in the 70s.
In the 70s. In the 70s, yes, Alvin Toffler. He wrote Future Shock in 1970, The Third Wave in 1980, and Power Shift in 1990, which I thought was quite interesting. But his works I find very, very interesting. And the reason I quote him is because I really like how he thinks about kind of the future and humanity and what's going to impact on us. And he said, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. So I started off with CEOs. They are the guys who are staying on top of their game because of the issue of competitiveness and relevance. Alvin Toffler clearly thinks so. The top leaders in the world every day are reading and learning. So I think that's a big deal about this competitiveness and relevance. Now, I want to move into a little bit of thinking about the fourth industrial revolution. This, of course, is a subject area I'm incredibly passionate about. Try and stay on point. Okay. So in terms of the fourth industrial revolution, there is so much that is written about. I've had the privilege recently of studying and recommending on the business strategy of Marriott Hotels. I want you just to think today about Marriott Hotels. And what would you do if you were the CEO of Marriott, given Airbnb? Are you going to make it? Are you still relevant? What do you think? I'm going to
List
pause.
your empty rooms.
You list your empty rooms. They actually do have a mechanism for doing that now, called the Vacation Club.
And the Pro Card Explorer.
Yes, and the Pro Card Explorer. There's so many things Marriott's doing. And yet, in 2016, Marriott was on a wave. 2016. We're 2018, that's 2 years ago. Fabulous results, the best results they ever had. And on the wave of enthusiasm, the CEO announced that we're going to build in 1 year 30,000 more bedrooms. 30,000 more bedrooms. Now I want you to think of the Marriott and what it takes to build 30,000 more bedrooms.
Yeah.
India, which is a huge population, does not have enough hotels that cover 30,000 bedrooms. So off he goes and he pronounces this. On this wave of enthusiasm, the share price went up. 2 weeks, everybody's really excited. The Marriott can see a future of growth, etc. And 2 weeks afterwards, the CEO of Airbnb said, in 2 weeks, I'm going to create 30,000 bedrooms. And the key issue of the fourth industrial revolution is not an issue of apps. It's an issue of business models. It's an issue of business models. So this thing about competitiveness and relevance is very real. How do you take advantage in this era? How do you respond if you are the CEO of Marriott? Now, I could talk about how you respond to disruption, but I thought it would be useful to give you a couple of examples of companies and how they have been responding in this fourth industrial revolution.
Sorry, Eileen.
Yes,
Can I just say something?
you can say whatever you like.
Are you saying competitiveness in that area? Okay, I've actually said that risk is a taboo word now, because risk is actually an opportunity.
100%.
Okay, so what he's done there, what Marriott has done, is actually taken that risk of not being able to keep that trend and turn it into an opportunity. So they've actually turned that whole mechanism of risk into an actual opportunity. People have built a stigma around the word risk, because it's not risk. Risk is something that you take it off it. You take something and you either make it or you don't. And I think that's what they've done there. They've taken that risk of coming down from the bell curve, coming down. They've actually played on it, and they've actually just taken that opportunity even further.
You know, since I did a whole strategy on Marriott, I could really spend 3 days just on Marriott. But yes, there are specific responses to the disruption that comes. You don't have to be passive. In fact, if I were to talk to you about disruption, there are 5 responses to disruption, and only one of them is about getting out of the business, about doing what Nokia did to Microsoft, selling the asset while you have still got value in it. Sometimes it's not a bad thing to exit a business. So in terms of the fourth industrial revolution, one of the things that I wanted to point out in this issue of competitiveness and relevance is the first issue about how do you value companies. The fourth industrial revolution has not only impacted companies, but it impacts specialities in companies. So if you're a finance guy, you're used to measuring the value of companies. So think of doing the valuation of Airbnb. Think of doing the valuation of Uber. Your financial models for evaluating those companies leave you with valuations that underplay the value of companies. Okay, they leave you with the evaluations that underplay the value of those companies. In fact, one of the things that's hardest to evaluate these days is what they call network effects. So in the fourth industrial revolution, a big issue is the rise of platforms and the network effects that they give rise to. So if I can just briefly talk about network effects, and then let's talk about what is the value of Airbnb and Uber. So network effects occurs when you have a positive effect in a closed system. Okay, so let's talk about it in Airbnb. In Airbnb, you have suppliers who put properties on the market. They're selling spare capacity very often in their homes. And they're able to put that on the market at a price point that is very competitive because they didn't build it as accommodation to rent. It's already paid for. Okay, so that accommodation goes at price points that are hard to compete with. As a consequence of that, you get a lot of customers. As a consequence of driving demand of lots of customers, you get a lot of people putting accommodation on the market. And that accommodation then ends up having accommodation in more and more and better locations, which drives more people using Airbnb. That's a network effect, where the whole system is constantly reinforcing the value of the network. Okay, so now think of Uber, now think of Airbnb, and how do you evaluate that? So today, people put the value of, does anybody know what they put the value of Airbnb at today?
I think it's about 226
26B.
billion now.
Keep going up. So Airbnb is almost at the same value as Marriott today because of this network effect. Marriott, that took 20 years, that built all of that real estate. Okay, it's quite a big deal actually to think about. It's quite a big deal to think about. I want you to think of Instagram. Instagram. It was sold for $1 billion. Was it sold for $1 billion because of the smart employees of Instagram? No. Because of the smart content put in by you and me. Okay. So this is the impact of network effects. Network effects. So in terms of this competitiveness and relevance, from a relevance point of view, if you're a finance guy, you're an investment guy, you have to learn new skills. You have to think about this world differently. This is the relevance thing. And that's why I say to you, you've got to keep on studying. Now let's think about other companies. I like some of the stuff that some of the companies are doing these days. If I think about the fourth industrial revolution, I think about Airbnbs and Ubers and Alibaba and Amazon. I don't know about you guys. They're the ones that immediately sort of come to mind. What I really love about it is actually there's so much more to it than just those companies. So a couple of companies that I thought I'd share with you. Just let me find my right place because a couple of companies I thought I'd share with you just because they bring to the fore the items I'm talking about. Okay, so let's think about this fourth industrial revolution and think about the good old tacky Nike shoes. So everybody thinks about fourth industrial revolution and about the tech. And of course there is tech involved. Don't get me wrong, there is tech involved. But everybody knows now that I don't have Nike shoes on though. I should have had Nike shoes on for the present model. That Nike's got sensors in their shoes. So if you are an avid athlete, you can actually load up all the steps you're taking, all the kilometers you're running. You can join a community. And in this way, they've created network effects around nothing humbler than something that's made out of a couple of pieces of perhaps leather and rubber and foam. I like to think about a company called McCormick. They create spices, and I like to think, gosh, how could I, if I was CEO of McCormick, use the fourth industrial revolution to actually attract new customers? And to be honest with you, when I thought of them, I actually couldn't come up with anything, but fortunately I had research. And that's this thing about competitiveness and relevance that I'm talking about. Okay, so what McCormick did is their 4 spices are 4 tastes: saltiness, citrus, sour, and toasted. That's all they produce, spices with those. So, of course, their company stayed and stable and kind of it has its market share. So what could it do? So what they did was they decided to see, are there other combinations? How could they grow market share? So what they did was they contacted the people who bought from them and they created some different ways of thinking about spices. They put out recipes and they invited their current customer base to test these out, putting new and different flavors together. And from this, on social media, they gathered information about who likes what. They took it further and they made it into a whole social media thing about people contributing recipes, having winners of this combination and that combination. And as a result, not only were they able to refresh their outputs and what they put together, they'd be able to reach a whole new generation and create this virtuous cycle of people contributing to recipes, making new recipes, making new combinations, and actually refresh their whole brand. I quite like it. I like another one. I wear glasses, as you can see. Now, one of the difficulties with wearing glasses is your distance. Everybody knows that. So when I need to buy glasses, it's the hardest thing for me, because actually to put on the glass frames, I then can't see what I look like with the glasses on. So I don't know how to choose. That's not even funny. It's really, it's a real world problem. How do I select glasses for me? Other than go to my husband, and then he does it, and then I see a photograph of I say, how could you have said those look nice on me? Are you out of your cotton picking mind? There's this lovely company in the US that's definitely for me. You actually kind of contact them, and they send you choose from a catalogue, 5-6 pairs of glasses, and they send them to you. And actually you try them on at home, and they tell you to take photographs and upload them. And then people like them and don't like them and what have you. And based on feedback, you decide which ones you send back and which ones you want to keep. I quite like that. I quite like that, because it's quite hard for me. So this fourth industrial revolution that we can talk about and bore ourselves silly with the likes of Uber and Airbnb is actually a huge opportunity, provided you think about your relevance and your competitiveness, provided you keep your thinking strong and current. The World Economic Forum releases the top skills of 2017, the top skills of 2018, and the 10 top skills that will land you high-paying jobs by 2020. This is according to them, I don't know. Okay. The top 3 out of the top 10 skills: complex problem solving, critical thinking, and creativity. Love it. Okay. Competitiveness and relevance relies on you to keep your mind open and to keep investing in those types of skills.
Isn't an algorithm analyst in that group as well?
There isn't in the 2020, but there is in the 2017. So yeah, I had a look at a few of them, because I was also trying to see how they change. And they do change over time. Yeah. Okay. The last point I've got about competitiveness and relevance. How am I doing for time? Am I
you're cool, actually.
Am I cool?
Well done. I was worried.
He gave me like, I remember it's only 20 minutes. I can talk for a long time. For a long time. Okay. So the last point I wanted to talk about in competitiveness and relevance is in fact entrepreneurship. Richard Branson, for me, is somebody who is a role model of entrepreneurial ability. And he says, the thing is, you don't wake up one day and say, I want to make money. He said, what an entrepreneur is somebody who is passionate about creating value for a customer and finding someone who loves the thing that you've created enough to get a transference of value between them and you. And I think that's quite special. Okay. In Zook and Allen's book, The Founder's Mentality of 2016, you know they're Bain. Am I allowed to mention they were Bain? No, these days you're allowed to mention Bain. The part that I love about thinking about the founder's mentality is they talk about the core founding mentality is that you get up every day wanting to create value for undeserving customers. and I've had to undeserving customers. He said yes, because your customers didn't ask for it. It's actually you who has a passion that this thing will in fact create value for someone else, and you live it and breathe it and drive it. To me, the third element of competitiveness and and relevance is in fact the spirit about serving your customer. So for South Africa, I believe that if we in South Africa could create a society who thinks like that, doesn't think about the dollar, but thinks about the transference of value. If I'm thinking all the time, how can I create value for you? And then through that, your recognition of the value I've created for you, that actually I get recompense. Wouldn't South Africa be in a much better place? So today I brought a few thoughts about competitiveness and relevance. You can see for myself at this age, I am still studying. So a couple of things that I could tell you. Last year I did an executive, so that I could be your coach, you see, an executive coaching course at UCT. This year I've studied through the IOD, what's it? So you want to be a director series?
GSA.
Yeah. Okay. I'm constantly trying to think about how can I add value as an African to Africa. So that's all I have to say.
Sorry,
Thank you.
Wow.
There is another element which people tend to disregard, especially in valuation. And it's something that's there. It's actually intellectual property.
Oh, of course.
How do you actually value intellectual property? How would you value Coca-Cola as a brand? And there's been a lot of talk about that because there are people who are trying to do that, but there's no fixed and hard rule on how do you evaluate a brand.
I think it's a very, very tricky thing.
It's
complex.
something. And then to add to what you just said now, if you buy something that you don't need, you're actually stealing from yourself. So
So it is a very important point, that.
Okay, there's another
You
one.
can get
now.
philosophical here.
If you if you look at the word lead,
Yes.
I always maintain that lead stands for learn, evolve, adapt, and deploy. That's what a leader does.
That's very lovely. Thank you.
Any questions, comments?
No,
Yes, Jen?
I love your comments around ongoing learning. I think it's vital, and obviously in the room we're probably all in agreement. One of the best books I've ever read was a book called Sense Making. Author is Berg, so obviously some kind of Scandinavian. But the really interesting point that he made, exactly as you were saying around the identity of CEOs, but the most successful and long-lasting CEOs have studied in the liberal arts. And for me that was fascinating, liberal arts and humanities. And when you look at complex thinking, critical thinking, creativity, so not necessarily as their foundational degree, but at some point they have studied liberal arts and humanities. When you look at those kind of thinking skills, they're not typically developed in the sciences or in finance. They are prolifically developed in the arts environment and humanities, and I found that so fascinating. He quoted a whole lot of research on that. So
I think there's a tremendous amount in what you're saying. If I bring it kind of, I'm blonde, so I actually bring things down to very simple concepts. But we were brought up thinking of IQ, and then EQ became the big thing, and more recently social quotient became a big thing. At CEDA, I met a lady there who's doing her master's on cultural quotient. And because I've led an ICT company for a black entrepreneur, I'm extremely in tune with the fact that our country could do with cultural quotient. We give and create offence inadvertently, and it creates barriers, to us being the best we can be and being therefore as competitive and relevant as we can be. I must say, I think these are part of the new skill sets. Kind of lower down in the list, and the fourth skill set on the Fortune 500 most studied subjects is cultural, which I think is very interesting. So if you're leading large successful companies, you have to be able to know and understand people.
It opens up a gap.
So thank you
And
for that
maybe
wonderful
to
point.
respond to that, because I'm a student of
I'm sorry
people.
about my cough.
That's okay.
As a sort of a student of people, I think we have to be very careful with the cultural aspect, that there's a lot of generalization.
Oh yeah.
And I loved what you said about understanding people, because it's not necessarily understanding people as collectives, it's understanding
Individuals.
individual people. That makes sense.
Yeah. Eileen.
Create a new module
Mhm.
called cultural psychology. Cultural psychology, because it's going to be one of the big things coming in. Your IT psychologist you're going to need because of the way we're moving. Maybe phone psychologist too, because everybody's a psychologist.
To pick up on
Okay, Brian?
To pick up on the point that Janet made about the importance of the liberal arts. On Saturday morning there was an interview with Reid Hoffman on CNN. I'm sorry, on Bloomberg rather. And he was his degree was actually in philosophy. He studied philosophy at Stanford University, and he said that what he got out of studying philosophy was the ability to sequence thinking and give the reasons behind thinking, and use this to analyze the investment thesis that people put forward to him, which is why he's such a success as an investor. So what is interesting is that Peter Thiel, who was with Hoffman and Elon Musk in PayPal, although Peter Thiel is actually a brilliant mathematician, who I also found out his early schooling was in South Africa actually, but despite being a brilliant mathematician, he actually studied philosophy as well. And so it's the importance of critical thinking is there, and we perhaps need to think through what exactly is critical thinking.
Okay, thanks, Brian. To me, and then we'll have Mark.
Yes, to me.
I'm going to talk to you, but after.
Oh, afterwards. Okay, to me.
You tell me, and I use it all the time. But it's about how women progressed.
Oh.
The story about the tea in the boardroom, but we can talk about it some other time.
Okay, to me.
Remember that. Shall I tell everybody since you brought it up?
Please do, because I can tell you, it's
The tea in the board.
fascinating
Tea in the boardroom. So, okay, you can tell the generation I'm from. So I did 23 years in mining. And in mining houses, I was the first ever female project manager. Now, when you are a blonde poppy, it really doesn't work for you. So the story he remembers is as a brand new project manager, I'm off to the meeting at the mines, and it's all the men. And of course, the tea person comes in, and they stand with the big tray of tea, look around the room, they see me, and the tea tray goes in front of me to serve tea for everybody. Not so. Isn't that right?
Okay.
Of course.
That's in the minutes, please.
And the minutes.
Yeah, Eileen served everyone
No,
some tea.
no, I did not. So the thing is, I had worked for somebody who was very wise before, and she had prepared me for that day.
Good.
She had prepared me for that day. I'm not a feminist. I'm not a big woman's liver. And I was extremely embarrassed. Okay, I sat there going, oh, this is the moment. I can either pour them tea, and I'm going to be relegated to that role forever, or I don't like a scene. So I poured myself tea. I
Passed it
passed the tray.
Brilliant.
And I have to the guy I passed it to, he looked at it, he looked at me. The room was quiet, everybody looked at each other. And he also didn't know what to do with that. he poured himself tea and passed it on. And from that, well, I don't know how you remember that to me, really. But from that time on, that's what happened in our meetings. So
it's not my monkey and not my circus.
yeah, but it's easy for me to say it now as a woman in my 50s. I'm sorry, but when I'm in my 20s, I felt, first of all, I'm sure my face was like, I felt challenged in a big way. And I didn't know it wasn't going to create a big upsetness with all of those minors, because they can be very tough on you, shall I say. So anyway, so to me now remembers me in the tea.
Well, you were very lucky you had someone to prepare for that.
Yeah,
Other female leaders do.
I am very lucky.
Usually a challenge in the boardroom.
I'm very lucky. You're quite 100%. It prepared me for many other moments, that prep.
Yeah.
I mean, two issues. I'm reading a very interesting book. It's called, actually, started recently, called Social Giants. These are companies that deliberately chose not to grow big. They are privately held companies. And what this guy says, when you look at actually around the world, the statistics, actually large corporates constitute probably 10 or less % of the total companies in the economy. In fact, that's even the biasness in even our education systems. We're teaching people based on large organizations, while most of the people are going to work for small organizations.
100%.
So now, it was very interesting with this book, when you look at Good to Great, that study.
I love
Fortune
Good to
500,
Great.
but it's based on that 10% or less. So nothing is written about these small giant, like a brewery in the States that decided that, one thing, they are going to focus on crafting. So now, where do you see now the fourth industrial revolution, where these companies privately held that deliberately chose to be great? So that's one question. Then the second question, it has to deal with another issue that we're not talking about, the basic income grant. We are talking about the industrial revolution, automation, but there's going to be a majority of people who may not have jobs. How do we deal with this issue of the basic income grant? Because that's one issue that we don't hear about. How do we give income to people who, even if they have got the ability, but there's no opportunity for them to work because few people can produce, or the robots can produce?
To me, you always ask more than one question in a question.
Yeah.
Answer the last question.
Typical researcher.
So the first item in terms of fourth in good to great. So I do need to declare bias. We started the day of, are you biased? I am biased. I am a great fan of good to great. Okay, and I teach it in a lot of places. Go figure. And I apply it to quite a few of the small companies I work with, because what I find is the things in good to great are still valid. You don't have to be thinking of great as in big. That's not what great is about. So you've answered your own question. You can choose what great looks like to you, which can be about creating a great customer value proposition. Can be anything. So I think you know the answer to that.
Just to your brain.
Well, check to see if I read. Good to great. So I'm very passionate about good to great. Though I think why I like it is, and you can tell how my brain works now. It's because it is based on data. So they didn't make it up. They actually looked at the data and said, what does it tell us? And actually, because of that, it resonates with me strongly. Very strongly. Okay, your second question. The fourth industrial revolution. So I didn't. Rocker. Okay, sorry, we didn't introduce ourselves to each other when we were sitting there, and you were doing my pen for me. But I don't typically talk about risks from a negative angle. But there is no question about the fact that the fourth and what is to come, the sixth industrial revolution, is a big deal for us in Africa. There is no question about it because of our history and our lack of education. There are real risks out there. There is nothing, though, that prevents you from having a great idea, no matter how educated or not you are. So the part, it sounded like you've been to the SA Innovation Summits. I must tell you, there are people from all sorts of backgrounds. There are people and their ideas are not all tech. And I have to tell you, I was astounded at some of the ideas and the people I saw there. So it is not for a minute that I am proposing that, okay, throw out your education and just kind of try and do it on your own. I think you gain huge amount by working on your education, by studying and developing your critical thinking. There's no question in my mind. But unfortunately, that's not available to everybody. And we have a huge challenge in this country. Well, what I know for sure is if we encourage people and create the frameworks for them, we are going to get people rising and rising and rising. The need for small, medium enterprises is never greater than now. And I think that ingenuity in human beings is there no matter your education. And it's a funny thing about poverty. It drives some people above the circumstance. Not everybody, but some. So there are some answers out there. It's a hard topic to me. We could be here forever. I don't know if others want to contribute. Sorry, who was next?
I wanted to
That's
ask,
Mark.
you mentioned that one of the big things for CEOs in the Fortune 500 was continuous learning.
Yes.
But you also mentioned a quote about learn, unlearn, and relearn.
Yes.
So I'm wondering how much of that continuous learning is just learning and not unlearning and relearning. What's your opinion?
I don't know, but I can tell you for myself, only an example of one. The time that I find I get things wrong is when I thought I'd learned it. And I don't know how else to say it. In all the roles I've led, the most humblings of time came immediately after the most successful of
So
times.
you think the most important time
And
is...
I think, because you think I don't know how to say it, you think
You got it.
you got it, you think you learned that lesson, and then the universe has a way of telling you it's not so. Your learning is not yet over. That's my personal experience. And the unlearning of what I'm good at, I don't think it's easy.
It's
I think it's
apply.
well, it's also sometimes unlearning. We as human beings, we like to get in a rhythm. Business travel actually teaches you that. I don't know how many of you do a lot of business travel. When you do business travel, the things that you take for granted, like where's the toothbrush, where's the bathroom, where have I hung my stuff, which route I take to work. When you're doing business travel, every decision and step you're taking is an act of thought. You find you're much more exhausted when you're doing business travel than when you're doing things from your home base. And it's because of the fact that you have to think about every step. So we as human beings gravitate to the rhythm of things. And we gravitate easily to where we are successful. Well, I do. And so then that's why unlearning is so important, because I thought it worked here, but I've missed the critical thinking because I'm in the groove, so to speak. And so then I don't stop and be critical and evaluate and really look and be mindful of that something's different and be alive to it.
So you're saying that the unlearning and relearning is almost more important than the learning?
Well, no, because I think the learning is a base. So I'm sorry, but like Maslow's hierarchy, you've got to have certain things that enable you to, I think, is what I think. But I mean, I don't have science on that. That's just from my heart.
Sorry, can
Okay,
I
yeah.
just say
Yes,
something?
please, Rocco.
You know, that when you do something like that, sometimes I will sit and I've got to do something. Okay, well, I've got to plan something. And I sit there and I say to myself, okay, I'm going to do da. And I say, okay. And I leave it there. Then I sit down and I say, no, hold on. There's something not quite right with it. Because something's telling me that I'm missing somewhere along the line. There's an easier way to do it. Or a way to make it more efficient. So you keep on playing with it in your mind. So you just carry on. So you're learning, you're unlearning, and you're relearning. So you take what you know, you apply it, you adapt to it, and then you say, not going to work that way. It's got to work in another way. If I do that. So basically what you're doing is you keep on plugging at what you know as the basics, and then you come out with something.
I think that's
based on that.
links nicely to the top 3 things for 2020, doesn't it?
It does indeed. It does indeed.
Yeah.
And you know, but just think of what you've said and that whole point. History is dotted with companies that were very successful that didn't make it.
Yeah.
That didn't make it. I mean, we don't need to talk about Kodak again. And why did Fuji? Okay. We don't need to talk about how many of you are old enough to know MySpace? Before Facebook. Nobody's going to say, I know, I'm the only one putting up my hand. Okay, and why did it not make it? It was a great product. Okay.
But even countries, the Roman Empire.
Of course. Now we're really getting
Empire.
into
All
history.
of those, they've come up and they've dropped. I
Sure.
mean, that's a business. I mean,
Yeah.
countries is a business. And if you don't run them properly, I've got a notion in my mind and I'm saying, why must we pay government tax that they can put in their pocket? Whereas if you come out with a solution whereby companies say, right, you do not pay tax, the money that you get is to buy what you need, then the companies start organizing the social responsibilities, which is your health, your schooling, your policing, etc. You don't need the government there. What do they do? Creating policies and laws. They've been broken anyway. So that's where we are. So you change that whole structure. I don't know whoever brought that in, but anyway. It was the Roman Senate.
But
I like
the part
that.
I don't want to leave is the point that Tumi raises about the impact of the Fourth Industrial Revolution on poverty. It is a big deal. It is a big deal for our country, this whole initiative that Cyril is running around the compact between private and public sector to create jobs. Now, I don't think the answer is easy at all. But the point is, the part that I really do believe. So I was here before 1994, and things were dire. I need to tell you, everybody was talking about were we going to become a war state, and okay, I know some of you weren't here and didn't feel that tension and don't know it, but things are tough now in South Africa. The part I know is South Africans are incredible and have incredible will to find a way. So I'm one of those who is full of hope.
We are
Yeah.
resilient.
All right.
Yeah. But it is a tough answer.
Any more
Together,
questions
to solve.
before my last comments? So Eileen, I can't now remember where exactly you said all this, but I mean you mentioned, about that lady that is studying culture. I mean, I've got my own views around, entrepreneurship in South Africa and poverty alleviation, because we've got, poverty in South Africa, it's
huge.
It's complicated.
It's complicated.
And it's a systemic issue.
Systemic.
I owned a small business myself, and it is just very difficult to get into it. Just the mere fact to get a business side, when you have money, I'm not talking about when you don't have it. You've got money, you want this.
It's huge.
It's a nightmare to get it in there. You want a certain license, it's just a nightmare to get into it. And I gravitate to this culture thing because I think it's a culture thing. In a sense that, my business is in Mpumalanga, somewhere in the almost rural areas.
Yeah, Robert's country.
You know what I mean? And
Sorry, I
it's
had to say
amazing
that.
how we sort of make things difficult when we're talking about us people that live there who happen to be black. You know, we make things difficult for ourselves there, because it's not that the ideas are not there. The ideas are there, but the culture of not making things happen, having to make someone wait. No, he can wait. There is no urgency, because had I gotten everything I needed all at the same time, I would have been far by now. But every time it's a hurdle. It's a hurdle. So I just wanted to attest, you know, just a comment on the culture thing. And the culture is not about race, ethnicity, whatever. The culture is what have people taught themselves to do things. That's what they have come to believe things are done this way. It's a culture. Every business, every big corporate naturally has a culture. You walk into Investec, it's got a culture. It's a very different culture to what you will have at Nedbank. Two distinct, very distinct. So yeah, that was just my comment. Yeah.
Well, culture's a big deal.
Yeah, it is a big deal. And I actually like, you know, the fact that Rocco is saying that we should have something about culture. I do think about a doctorate. I'm not sure, but I do feel strongly about this culture thing.
I'll be your supervisor.
Yeah. Thanks, Rocco. And Eileen, thank you so much. And I've gotten something here for you.
What is this, my application form for?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That's really fun.
So if you figure that out, if you figure it out,
it's a puzzle.
Yes.
Oh.
Send me a picture.
Can I tell you one
Eileen?
last thing about prejudices? So in December last year, I did a race. I entered into a race from Cape Town to Zanzibar. Teams of 3. Now, in December, going through Africa.
Heat.
Yes, no. I am blonde, okay.
Okay.
Teams of 3. So I did it because the purpose of the race was to see if I'll tell you a little bit about it because it tells you about culture, but to see if we could be safe doing it in the way we did it, because they want to promote a certain market share for tourists to come to this country. So they're trying to attract the backpackers, low-cost tourist kind of option. Okay, so it was a fascinating experience. Now the key thing about this race, I get 2 different reactions, talking about culture, across a racial divide. And I'm going to tell you the unique thing about it, and you're going to smile when I say that as you think about what it means to you. It was a race, teams of 3, via public transport only.
Oh.
And most people I tell who are white go, gosh, I don't even know how I could do that. And most black people tell me, I don't know why you would do that. This is how I live my life, using the... Are you mad? So, and it is very interesting from a cultural point of view. Why would you subject yourself to that? Would you? To me? I'm just going to ask you. Oh, he's thinking.
Yeah, he is thinking.
I use public transport on a
yes,
regular
exactly.
basis.
That's
So
why I'm
for
asking
me,
you.
It's nothing new.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what do you think for me?
Oh.
It's an eye-opener.
No, because it's less regulated as you go north. The taxis are less safe,
Less reliable.
Real experience.
less reliable. The roads are less good. What do you think?
Yeah, look, I think, you know when you think of
For
public
pleasure.
transport in this country, it's a...
Listen, we all think we do public transport today, darling.
No, with Uber.
Because we Uber. See, culture. Sorry, I've got a joke.
Okay. 1 minute.
I own car train. What do you think?
You know, it's like in 2015,
Yes.
I used to travel by actually trains from Springs to come to Joburg.
Oh, yes.
And if I wanted to go to a meeting, I knew that I'd have to wake up 5 o'clock in the morning.
Exactly.
Pick up a train, then I know for 15 rands I'll
Geez,
get
you
to
must be
Joburg.
strong to pick up a train, eh?
Rocco.
Okay.
So now, you would spend actually 10 rands to take a train to Joburg. Then you spend about 20 rand on a
Minibus?
on a minibus taxi, obviously with Uber.
Yeah, much more.
And what was so funny, one of the incidences that I had is that the public trains actually regularly stops. And I remember a train stop just before we reached Germiston Station.
Oh, yeah.
And we had ladies, some of the ladies were in high heels having to walk on a train because you have to reach the next train station, take a connecting train. So now when you look at, in fact, there's majority of people in this country travel via public transport. Some of them are in taxis, some of the taxis that I have been in, you look down, literally there's a hole in the middle of a taxi.
I now can tell you I've done that too.
So in fact, the majority of people
And the
here,
heat from the exhaust
I
is
tell
burning your bum.
You know a lot.
But it's a very interesting chat. We can talk about it.
Yeah. So, but thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Eileen.
It's okay for inviting me again. Thank you,
and we really
everybody.
appreciate
Loved
it.
Thank you everybody for your time.
Thank you so much.